Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fit Positive podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about muscles, bones and joints because these systems are at the heart of how well we move, age and live in midlife and beyond. And no one explains that better than Dr. Vonda Wright, who has become a real hero of mine in this area. I only wish I was introducing her as a guest on the podcast, but unfortunately I'm not. I'm just going to talk about her work and explain it to you in a way that hopefully you can take away some practical action items to help you age well. So Dr. Wright is a double board certified orthopaedic surgeon, longevity specialist, and the author of several books, the most recent being Unbreakable, which I mentioned on previous episodes. I've got it here beside me. I've absolutely been devouring this book. It's excellent. Lots and lots of science referenced in here that is very helpful for us at our age. And our age, she calls this the critical decade, which is between 35 and 45. I'm 48 now, but this is the window where we can truly shape the quality of the second half of our lives. And her message is empowering, and it's why I do what I do. Because she says decline is not inevitable. Mobility, strength and health are trainable at every stage of life. And I've seen this. I've seen it in my own members, but I've also seen it online. Just the other day, I posted a story from a woman who is 102 in the US, and she is going to the gym every day. She's able to hold a plank for 3 minutes, and she says she feels amazing and she looks amazing. So it just proves that message that decline is not inevitable. Aging is, of course, inevitable, but decline with age is not. And I think we have trouble disassociating or disconnecting the two. So we have, our own family members of the previous generations who we've seen decline as they aged. That is not necessarily going to be our path. And we have information and power now that is going to help us change that trajectory for us. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time, and it's an empowering message that she has and that I feel very strongly as well. So Dr. Wright, as an orthopedic surgeon, has coined this term, the Musculoskeletal Syndrome of Menopause, or MSM, which is a framework that she developed to explain the cascade of hormonal and mechanical changes that affect our bones, our muscles, and our connective tissue as estrogen declines. So she observed that many perimenopausal and menopausal women were presenting to her with symptoms like joint pain, frozen shoulders, stiff shoulders, tendinitis, tennis elbow, unexplained arthritis, or just general loss of strength that couldn't always be explained by a single injury. That was the thing. There was no single thing that caused these issues. They kind of just developed out of nowhere. Estrogen has broad system-wide effects across our bones, our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments, and even our cartilage. And so when estrogen falls, the protective nature of it is lost. And this can trigger a chain reaction through the whole body. Some people experience some symptoms, other people experience others, and some unfortunate women experience the whole list of symptoms. And some of these issues include arthralgia, frozen shoulder, bone loss, muscle loss, arthritis. So all of these symptoms can be categorized inside this framework into one kind of connected picture. And recognizing this is helpful for clinicians who can now look at them and look at the person holistically instead of treating one symptom at a time. So that's the benefit of her coming up with a framework like this. And what she says is the musculoskeletal system is the organ of longevity. If you can move, you can live. And the opposite to that is, obviously, if you can't move, you don't have a very good quality of life. You could end up in a nursing home. And like I always say to my members, what we're doing in our method, in our program is a nursing home prevention strategy, essentially. We want to be looking, long term and preventing that outcome for ourselves. So much that we can do. Because the changes that we experience that she noted, they're not signs of inevitable decline. They're just feedback signals from the body that we need to do something, So if you've got stiffness, frozen shoulder, bone loss, muscle loss, there are things that we can do. Even without estrogen, the body remains highly responsive to strength training, nutrition, movement, and recovery strategies. And we do need to look at across the board at all of those things. Just one thing is never going to be enough anymore. We do have to take a holistic view of ourselves and our health strategies to make sure that we're completely looking after our whole health, not just one aspect of it. So particularly focusing on the bones now, we often have reduced bone density as we age, especially as we go through perimenopause and beyond. But we may not realize it until we've already broken a bone, because it's one of those silent conditions that we don't know we have until we break a hip or we fracture a leg, or it's too late, because there is a statistic out there based on a study that was done that showed that 30% of people who fracture a hip at the age of 65 or older die within a year. And that's not very nice to think about, but when we think about why that happens, we can work back from that and make sure that it's not going to be the case for us. And what happens is, so these people have reduced bone density and muscle mass as they aged, and then they fall because they've lost their muscle mass and maybe they've lost some of their proprioception and balance. And so they fall and they break a bone because their bone density has also reduced. Then if it's a hip fracture, they end up in hospital for a period where their bone density and their muscle mass reduces further. So then they go back out into the world and they have another fall, they break another bone, and it's just a downward spiral from there. And anyone who has had an older relative with osteoporosis who has had multiple falls, we'd often say in Ireland, but that was, when we look back, that fall she had that time was the beginning of the end. And it's awful to think about, but often that is the case, and it is that downward spiral. But it can be prevented. That's the good news and the hopeful news. And the very first thing we need to do when we're in midlife is figure out how is our bone density. And the best way to figure that out is by having a DEXA scan. So I had a DEXA scan for the first time at 48, just about a month ago at the Galway Clinic, the DEXA unit in the Galway Clinic, which was a fantastic experience. Really, really nothing to be worried about at all. It's not like having a CT scanner or an MRI. It's not a big machine. It's just a table. You just lie on a table and there's a little scanner that goes over your hips, really mainly in your lower back, and measures your bone density. As someone with ADHD, I'm not great with forms or letters or admin in general. So this was very easy because they sent me a text and a link to book my own appointment, like as if I was booking a hair appointment. Booked my appointment. Then it immediately sent me a form to fill in via WhatsApp. Then I just turned up to my appointment and I met with the team there. Kirsty, I think the girl's name was, who did the scan. She was lovely. We had a chat. She took down some medical history, family history. The reason I qualified, not everybody qualifies to have a DEXA scan before the age of 50, but the reason I did is because my grandmother had very severe osteoporosis, so severe that she would break bones just sitting on a chair. And yes, she did end up in a nursing home, even though her brain was absolutely perfect. Her bones were failing her, and she was that statistic where now she didn't die within a year, but she had a long, slow decline, all really related to muscle and bone loss. And her osteoporosis was so bad that her doctor asked her permission to use her scan, her DEXA scan, in his university lectures because it was the worst he'd ever seen. So if you have a family history like that, where your mother is shrinking and you can see, or she has osteoporosis, or your grandmother like mine, you should then be a little bit more proactive and speak to your GP about when is the right time for me to have a DEXA scan. So I went to my GP, that's how I got the referral for the DEXA scan, went in, had my scan with Kirsty, and literally that was on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday morning, I had an email with the results, and thankfully my results were normal. I'm in the normal category for my age. And the way they know that, here's the two scores they look at, are T-score and Z-score. So your T-score is relevant if you're over 50, and they compare your bone density to a healthy 30-year-old. That's how they compare and measure the bone density loss, if it is a loss. And so if you're over 50, they'll look at a T-score. Anything lower than -1 means you're osteopenic. Anything lower than -2.5 means you have osteoporosis. Obviously, they'll take you through all of this when you go through it. But for me, it was a Z-score they were looking at, and anything higher than -2 for a Z-score. So the Z-score compares you to women of your age, and you want to be higher than -2. And mine was just under -1, I think. So still some bone loss, but still in the normal range. So that's good. I'm happy about that. I'm completely in the normal range, nothing to worry about, but I'm still going to be very proactive. And we'll talk about those strategies that we can take in a minute. So yeah, really good positive experience with the DEXA unit in the Galway clinic, but highly recommend talking to your GP about it if this is a concern for you. If you have a family history of osteoporosis, or you just have a concern about it, you just definitely speak to your GP and just chat about when might be the right time for you to have a DEXA scan, because once you have that first one, then you have a baseline and you can measure from there annually or less frequently than that, whatever is recommended. For me, they recommended coming back to the same scanner next time to have another scan done. So I think it'll be another year from now, I'll have the next one and I can measure. And, really positive stories from within my community. 2 separate women reported an increase of 4% in their bone density from one year to the next, based on what they were doing, the interventions they were making, and that was mainly around workouts, lifting heavy weights. But just suffice to say that there's a lot that can be done if your DEXA scan isn't what you want it to be. Don't worry, there's so much that we can do. And that brings us into the next section of our podcast, which is going to be about the Fit Positive method, what we do within the Fit Positive method to focus on increasing our bone density, increasing our muscle mass, and strengthening our joints. And what can we do proactively to improve our bone density? The number one thing we can do is weight-bearing exercise, and ideally, the more weight you're bearing, the better. So if you're doing something like lifting weights in a gym, resistance work with heavy weights is the most powerful tool to protect both your bones and your muscles. Remember, you need both. You need both healthy and strong muscles and bones. So the way the resistance training works is by lifting heavy weights, you're exerting a force on the bone via the muscle. So the muscle tugs on the bone, and that signals to the bone it stimulates bone cell turnover. So new bone cells can be created. Most of our bone density is created by the age of 30, and we start to lose it soon after that. But that's not the end. You can still build more bone. You can still stimulate bone cell turnover after that age. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about my members who've increased their bone density by 4%. So don't think all is lost if you didn't focus on this before the age of 30. Absolutely not. We can do so much. So strength training is number one at the very top of the list. And within our strength training program, we do jumping with weights or just jumping on the spot. It's up to the individual to decide what they're ready for. But I use one dumbbell under my chin and I do jump squats. And Dr. Vonda Wright recommends doing 20 of those per day. That's perfect. That will help you increase your bone density. She calls it bashing your bones. So a bone bashing workout where you're landing heavily on your feet. So we used to jump, protect our joints and land softly. Now we're doing the opposite. We want to land heavily because you want that force to be, nice and heavy to create that signal that stimulates bone cell turnover. So jumping with weight or without weight, either will work. Lifting heavy weights pulls on the bone via the muscle and exerts that force that stimulates bone cell turnover. Those two things within our strength training are absolutely critical, and we do those all the time on my program. The next thing we can do is make sure we're getting enough protein, because protein is what we need from a nutritional perspective to increase our muscle mass. And so, how much protein do we need? Anywhere from 1.8 to 2.3 grams per kilogram of your body weight per day. But you can think about it like around 30 grams per meal is what we want. So all of our meals in the Fit Positive app, we're aiming for around 30 grams of protein in each one of those meals. Obviously combining that with healthy carbs, lots of fiber, healthy fats. And we have these macro balanced meals, but a very important component of our macro balanced meals in the Fit Positive app is protein. And we're aiming for 30 grams on average per meal. Now, if you're having snacks, it'll be less than that. Often we aim for maybe, 15 grams, around about that in a snack. All right, so protein, super, super important. And honestly, it's one of these things that supports muscle repair, bone density, and recovery, all of the above. But we neglect it. We can neglect it. And that's one of our primary focuses now in my program is protein. And it's funny because I came from a vegan background where I hardly ate protein at all. So I'm not surprised that there is a little bit of bone loss in my DEXA scan, and I'm working to reverse that. So I will report back next year and let you know what my DEXA scan is. I'm hoping to increase it from now until next year using all of these protocols to help me. So in terms of the nutrients specifically, the ones that are most important when it comes to bones are obviously protein, but also calcium, vitamin D, magnesium, and omega-3s are all important. And I talked about this in our supplements episode, which was, you can find that on, I think it was the last episode where I talked about supplements. So I won't get into that now, but calcium, vitamin D, magnesium are the three top ones. And I will re-include the supplements cheat sheet in the show notes of this episode for anyone who wants to take a look at that. All right, onto the joints. And my personal bane of my life at the moment is my frozen shoulder. So frozen shoulder, Dr. Vonda Wright talks about all the time on her social media and in her book. But it's one of those conditions that's very common as we go through perimenopause. Another one is tennis elbow, and another one is plantar fasciitis. All of these very, very common within this age category of women. Men also have it. I've just spoken to 2 different men in the last week who've also had frozen shoulders. It's not limited to people going through perimenopause, but it is very common, and actually in Japan, they call it the condition of the 50-year-old. For me, my personal story, and I'll just tell you my personal experience, I'm not a medic and I'm not a physio. So if you do have this, don't take my advice, go and seek medical help yourself. But I'm sharing my experience just, for information, really. For me, it began as a dull ache, which, I thought, I have a bit of stiffness in my shoulder. That was it. And I thought it would just go away on its own over time. So I continued with my workouts. And when we were in France, I noticed as I was taking a top off to go into the sea, for example, I was really struggling to lift my arm up to take the top off and to go into the sea. Same thing with fastening my bikini at my back. I could no longer get my hand behind my back. And that's a very telltale sign. If you can't get your hand behind the back, there's something wrong. So what is frozen shoulder? It's like, and I'm not a medical expert, but what I've learned from my physio, who is excellent, and I'll talk about him in a second, the capsule around the shoulder joint becomes inflamed and thickened, tightening the joint and limiting movement. So that's the key thing, is that it's like, that's why it's called frozen shoulder, because the joint kind of freezes up. And for me, I had pain, right, when I was reaching for things, or if I was trying to wave. Or a really good example is if you're in the car and you're going into a car park, I was reaching my arm out. It's my right shoulder. So reaching out to grab the ticket, absolute agony to get that ticket out of the machine as I went into the car park. So things like that. But it wasn't sore all the time. It was only when I moved in particular ways, like reaching above my head, reaching behind my back. My process for investigating this was I went to my GP. She initially thought it was frozen shoulder. And she said, let's just get an MRI to have a look and confirm the diagnosis. But when the MRI came back, it said I had tendonitis. And then I was sent on to my physio. And so I went to this physio in Galway called Owen O'Connor. He's absolutely brilliant. I've only had one appointment with him so far. He did a clinical diagnosis, compared the MRI results to the clinical symptoms that I presented with, and said, there's no doubt in my mind that you have frozen shoulder. And the MRI showed, tendon degeneration and inflammation. So I thought I had this tendonitis, but that wasn't the thing that was causing the issue. It was frozen shoulder. So he confirmed that through clinical assessment. And then he described what it is. Number one is, the great thing about frozen shoulder is that it does tend to heal itself over time. Without treatment, it will heal itself and you will get full range of motion back in your shoulder, which was a huge relief. And the other positive thing was that you can't damage your frozen shoulder by moving, even though it is painful sometimes to move in certain directions. That doesn't damage the frozen shoulder anymore. And in fact, what you're supposed to do is encourage movement to prevent the freezing or lessen it. And that's why we go to physios. The downside is that it can take, if untreated, up to 30 months to fully recover, which is well over 2 years. So imagine not being able to take your top off or, maybe even wash your hair properly for 2 years. We don't want that. So let me just explain the 3 stages firstly. The first stage is freezing, where you have pain and stiffness. And the stiffness gradually gets worse. And I went through all of that while I was in France. And that could be, anything up to 6 months, I think he mentioned. And I had like a 3-month period where I had that process of pain and stiffness. Then you move into the second stage, stage 2, which is frozen. And this is where the pain might ease, but the movement is still restricted. So he assessed my movement. I just could not move it in the directions that he wanted me to move my arm. But it wasn't sore as such. It was just that it wouldn't move, And then the last stage is thawing, where the motion gradually returns over time. But the whole 3 stages combined can take up to 30 months, but it might be as little as 6 months. The key is to, I think, follow a treatment path to accelerate that whole process. But it's a perfectly valid option to opt for no treatment and just stay as you are and let it run its course. For me, in the job I'm in, I need to work out. I want to have full range of motion in my arm. So I wanted to pick a treatment path that would accelerate that process. So what he recommended was 2 things, and this is specific to me. It's not going to be the same for everyone. Corticosteroid injection, ultrasound led. So this is where you use ultrasound to guide the injection. You're not just jabbing it generally into the shoulder, you're putting it into a certain spot led by ultrasound. The reason for that is to reduce the pain. And then we have physio, which is to increase the movement in the joint. The decrease in pain will help me tolerate the physio and increase that motion in the joint. So the 2 things combined should help me accelerate the recovery. But I'll let you know how it goes. It could be anything from 6 months to 2 years. But he said I'm already out of the freezing stage and into the frozen stage, because at this point it's mainly restricted movement, whereas the pain really, it's not getting any worse now. It's just still restricted, and I'm managing fine. I can still do my workouts. The good thing is that the workouts don't make it any worse, so I can keep going with those, but I just have restricted movement in one arm. So that's the frozen shoulder. And again, there is a strong link with estrogen, because estrogen maintains elasticity, collagen, and joint lubrication. So when it drops, tissues dry, stiffen, and get inflamed, which can explain why frozen shoulder, tendinitis, and plantar fasciitis become more common in midlife. So like I said, frozen shoulder does nearly always improve. There are more treatment options than the ones that I'm following. So all of the full list is, sometimes it'll be just physio and gentle movement to restore the range of motion. If you can tolerate the physio, maybe there's no need then for the corticosteroid injection. Short-term anti-inflammatories, this is what I started with actually. My GP recommended, she's excellent, my GP, she recommended anti-inflammatories for 5 to 7 days to start with, just to see if that helped. Unfortunately for me, it didn't, but for some people it could. And then, like I'm doing, a corticosteroid injection plus the physio, the 2 things combined are often very effective. And then there is another option, which is a last resort, and that is surgery. So the surgery is where they manipulate the joint. You're put to sleep and they manipulate the joint for you. Always surgery is the last resort. We don't go down that path unless absolutely necessary. For me, I'm hopeful that I will be able to tolerate the physio and that the injection will help. There's also strong evidence linking estrogen therapy, HRT, to better joint health. And this is a controversial topic. So it's definitely not something you want to say, well, Claire says I should do this. That's not the case. I am not an expert in HRT and I am not a medic. You need to discuss this with your doctor if you think that you want to discuss HRT at all. But there was one study in Duke University in 2024 which found that women on HRT were almost 50% less likely to develop frozen shoulder than women who were not on HRT. So it seemed that HRT was protective against the development of frozen shoulder. It's not considered a treatment for frozen shoulder, but it did appear to maintain joint lubrication, collagen turnover, and inflammation control. HRT has been shown to reduce bone loss. So if you are a person who has a high risk of osteoporosis, it may be the case that HRT will be recommended to prevent that osteoporosis. It's also been shown to improve collagen in tendons and ligaments and ease joint pain and stiffness. But it is not for everyone. We know this. It's not for everyone, HRT, and for some people, it's not going to be appropriate. Worth discussing with your GP for menopause specialist, especially if you're noticing persistent joint pain or early bone loss, or you're struggling with this musculoskeletal syndrome where you have lots of issues, bone pain, joint pain. Bring that to your GP and discuss what the best option is for you. So I mentioned already the two members who came to me and told me they had increased their bone density by 4%, which is phenomenal. I'm sure there are many more people in the community who have done similar but haven't actually mentioned it. And then there's another story, two other women who were advised, thankfully, by their oncologists after they went through breast cancer and treatment for it, including chemotherapy, to make sure to build themselves back up by doing strength training and eating plenty of protein and healthy fiber. And that's what they did as part of the Fit Positive method. They joined my community. They followed the Fit Positive method, where we focus on getting the right amount of food in the right balance. So plenty of protein, carbs in the form of lots of fiber, and healthy fats. And then using that fuel to build muscle in your workouts, and obviously lots of steps as well. And those women who have been through breast cancer, and it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month this month in October, went back to their oncologist for checkups, and the oncologists were very, very pleasantly surprised at how well they had built back up their muscle mass and their bone density since they went through their treatment. So even if you're in that situation where you've been through treatment for breast cancer or any cancer and you're worried that you've depleted your bone density and your muscle mass, don't worry. These things can be manipulated and changed if you implement the things that work. So just to recap, these things are building muscle, eating enough protein, moving well throughout the day, up and about as much as possible. And at the moment on my program, we're focused on mobility, recovery, flexibility, moving with good form and technique. All of these things are critical to avoid injury, because we're more prone to injury. We just are as we go through perimenopause and we lose our estrogen. So what we have on my program is we have 6-week cycles where we're lifting heavy, progressively lifting heavier through the 6-week cycle. Then we have a 2-week or sometimes a 1-week deload program where we reduce the weight. We focus on mobility, balance, stability, flexibility, and form and technique, so that we can slow down to speed up and avoid the injuries that are so common in midlife as we go through perimenopause. So we do need to be more careful, but we don't need to avoid lifting heavy weights. We just need to make sure that we're doing it properly with slow controlled movement and good form and technique. And we need to incorporate mobility into all of our workouts. I'm also spending a lot of time in the sauna recently because that's anti-inflammatory. It helps with that inflammation that we can have in the joints and in the muscles. So yeah, like we need to use all of the tools in our tool belt. I say this all the time. Don't just go for one thing. Look at all of the things that are available to us. Make sure they're all backed by science and use the tools that are relevant for you in partnership with whether it's your PT, your health coach, your physio, or your GP. Like, use the resources, the people who are available to you. Don't suffer in silence. Women have a history of putting themselves last and suffering in silence. Prioritize your own health, because you deserve to be fit, healthy, and avoid all of these things that are truly avoidable. And now is the critical time. Midlife is that time when we can really change the trajectory of our health for the better. So to sum up, estrogen decline affects every part of the musculoskeletal system. These changes, though, are not irreversible. They do respond to training, nutrition, and recovery. And HRT can also play a role for some women. Building muscle, eating enough protein, and moving well are the best long-term insurance plans for bone and joint health. Conditions like frozen shoulder are treatable. They're a signal to act, though, not to stop. So we need to act, move forward, find the treatment path that's right for you. You'll find the Fit Positive Supplements cheat sheet, the full reference list, including Unbreakable by Dr. Vonda Wright and the 2024 Duke University study on HRT and frozen shoulder, all linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend or tag me on Instagram, because the more women that learn about all of this, the better we will all be for the long term. It's time to get strong, confident, and proactive. See you next week.